that's true. Naked Palpatine.
Oh, you pick that one. Fresh out of the clone tank, nude Palpatine is my
Well, that's the first thing I think of when you say Dark Empire Palpatine. Hello everybody, and welcome back. Well, not to Malazan. To something long before Malazan. The Kharkanas trilogy. Book 1, Forge of Darkness, Part 3 and 4. But before I discuss that, I want to talk about the book as a whole, non-spoiler-wise. This is definitely the rising action of a much larger story. That will be concluded in a trilogy, of course. This is such a Greek tragedy. Everything kind of compiles at the end of this. And there's no hope. We know how things will end. Because we know Malazan Book of the Fallen. At least if you're reading this in publication order. You know what Kharkanas will be. What you don't know is what it was, and we get a bit of that here. But it all comes crashing down. War is coming. And there's nothing we can do to stop it. And people will not show compassion or mercy. They will have vengeance. From Enamander to other characters, it is going to be a bloodbath. None of that happens in this book. We get the rising tide so that it can happen, but it has not happened yet. But this is kind of the setup of this entire book is, let's bring back some conflict. The second half is phenomenal. There's still not a lot of action, it's very introspective. But I never came to Malazan for the action anyway. I have trouble reading action scenes in books. I focus on the philosophy, dialogue, and plot, more so than the action scenes, which I'll check for death, but other than that, it's kind of flying over my head, except for a few instances. But that's more of a me problem than anybody else. I've said that before. But what a phenomenal read. I want to get into spoilers, but I just want to say, overall, the themes of this book are so powerful, and there's one scene in particular that is just absolutely dripping with atmosphere, emotion, tension, written with the greatest of prose, just absolutely exquisite. But this is kind of where we see a split in brotherly love. Very much reminded me, it's not the same dynamic, but reminded me of Midnight Tides. And implications with no resolution yet, and I don't think it'll be resolved in Fall Light either. We'll see him walk in shadow when that gets completed. But, yeah. I have to say this is a must-read. It's honestly better than some of the books of the Fallen. And I highly, highly recommend it. But I know the people that are watching this primarily have read the book. It is an older book. It's been out for some time. But yeah, we get into some spoilers. And if you're not into that, completely get it. I really don't want to spoil anything about the second half. If somehow you haven't read it, which I know a lot of people kind of fall off. But you really should. And I just give it a mark of seal of approval. And highly recommend that you watch this tragedy unfold and this sort of inevitability of what is to come. I think you owe it to yourself as a Malazan fan. I'm getting spoilers now. If you don't want that, there's the door. It is kind of interesting. We start with book or part 3, the proofs of your ambition. And Draconis explains how gods kind of work in Malazan. I mean, we kind of, or Malazan, we kind of already knew this um, in terms of worship, rising you to godhood, as opposed to being ascendant, which is like you're a demigod at that point, but you're not, beholden to any followers yet because you've not ascended to godhood. Hate, I don't know, with his hostage. They find a dead body who turns out to be his brother's uh, wife. So it's his sister-in-law. But what's interesting is that this wife is Hood's wife. So Hat the Jagat is Hood's brother. We get a scene between Draconis and Olara Thiel, which is a very interesting scene. She's more fresh in my mind out of anything from the Book of the Fallen in terms of, I just finished Dust of Dreams and The Crippled God not too long ago, and she was, a big factor in those books. So it was interesting seeing how they play off here as opposed to how they all play off later. So also, we learn Draconis' real name is Suzerain. Ulrich and Renar have some romantic fun times. This book is extremely horny. I mean, that's kind of the point. There's a lot of incest or want of incest, and maybe it's just showing the degradation of society. I don't know, but there's a lot of it in here. Sometimes in a bit more detail than I'd prefer, but Erickson does what Erickson does well, and it's not the first time he's done it. I mean, he's done it in other Malazan books, but I just felt dirty sometimes, man. I was like, I'm at work. If somebody were to peer over and start reading what I'm reading, I think I'm reading smut. So it never goes too egregious or anything, but it is worth mentioning. It can be a little detailed. You know, I'm not a prude or anything, but when I'm in the middle of my break, I got somebody sitting next to me. The fear of them even glancing and only reading something out of context like that worries me, man. I gotta say. Um, Osric also wants to be set apart from his father. We also meet Sandaleth, who will matter, of course, later on, who's a hostage. Also, I was a bit confused on this. Maybe somebody can clarify. Spite kills the youngest sister, Malice, or harms her significantly, or something. Because later on, I think that they're feeding her, but she just seems completely off and different now. I'm not exactly sure what they did to her, but they definitely harmed her. That's what came across. Okay, here's a big one. And I don't mean to be annoying. That is not the point. The point of my reviews, right, is to give my perspective. And everybody's going to say what they want to say if they review this book. And, this is really the only thing. I'm just saying, I did the same thing in Told the Hounds because it was also a prominent thing that came up. And today we're going to talk some philosophy / theological discussion because it was brought up in this book. And so I'm going to address it from my perspective. We have the Euphophro dilemma. That's not what it's titled as, but that's essentially what Erickson's getting at. So I just want to quick old Google. So Euphophro dilemma. Does God will something because it is good? Or is something good because God wills it? If God wills something because it is good, there is a standard of morality that is greater than God. Or if something is God because God wills it, then God can change what is right or wrong at will, and goodness is arbitrary. So either way, the dilemma, because it only presents two equations, is that God is immoral and faith is kind of stupid, is basically the point. That is the point of the Euphophro dilemma. So, in context to the Malazan series, in the context of how gods work in this series, absolutely. Because in this context, we have created gods, created beings. We get into the metaphysics, not metaphysics, but the meta narrative here of, created gods. Because in the sense, if we're being technical here, Erickson is God because he's the one writing these stories. He has the will to change and create anything about these characters. He is writing the story. He is the God above all others. He is the one writing it. He is the one in charge. He is the one who makes us sympathize with some or not sympathize with others. There's no person who comes out of Memories of Ice thinking that the Penny and Domin are actually misunderstood and good people. No one. There's not a single person on the planet that could read this and make that assertion. Unless they're insane. But Erickson orchestrated it in such a way where you probably would feel no sympathy. And you still don't after reading it. You get some context with the Jagat baby at the end, who turns out to be the seer. Spoilers for Memories of Ice, but I assume you've read it if you're listening to this. But that's Erickson choosing to make it that way. And so in this universe, we have gods that are created, that were at one point mortal, that come into being. And even with my example of Erickson being God, he is a created being, or a being that didn't always exist, if you don't want to use the term created because it upsets you. Just a being that exists, but did not always exist. So in that context, absolutely the Euphophro dilemma works for these gods. Why should we follow Draconis or Kroll or I'm assuming Karsa becomes a god. Why should we follow Karsa? Why should we follow I don't know, any of the gods in the series? Why should you follow Dancer slash Cotillion or Shadow Throne or this or that? Why should you follow any of them when you don't know the motives, you don't know who they are, and they were created to be a god at a certain point as opposed to another time when they weren't a god? Or the whole thing until the Hound's the Redeemer, who is a finite life, may exist forever now, but did not always exist, right? That all works. The Euphophro dilemma works perfectly for this context, for this world. But in reality, it doesn't matter if you believe in God or not. That's not the point. But if you're going to critique something, critique it fairly. I'm not saying this is what Erickson is doing, but he's definitely. It is meant to be more truth. It is all layered in meaning. And Erickson doesn't just write things for silly of it. He's making parallels to real life on top of his own story. Okay? But the Euphophro dilemma only works if there are only two options, which is the dichotomy. That is what the argument presents. But is that the only two courses of action? Usually, when you have something not binary, it's not the case. In most philosophical, theological discussion, there is something called nuance. Okay? You, as a finite being, with a finite amount of time, in a finite mind, finite knowledge, if you can come up with even a single explanation, theory, or answer that doesn't go with those two answers, you have immediately destroyed the dilemma. The dilemma only works if those are the only two options possible. So, if God follows some sort of goodness, then God is not good. And he appeals to a standard higher than himself. And if he makes it up as he wants, then it is all arbitrary. But there is a third option. Because the difference between the Malazan gods, and at least in terms of Christian, monotheistic, Jew, Islam circles, they believe this core concept, which is that God is eternal. God has always existed. So let's accept that premise for a second. I'll get off of this. I know that's not what this video is here for. It's not what you're here for. But I'm going to give you my perspective because I know no one else is going to say this if they make a video on Malazan. Only I would. So, and again, this is going to be super profound if you've never looked into philosophy or anything. Otherwise, you've heard this time and time again. So, third option. God is inherently good. It is a part of his nature. He can no more do bad than a circle can be a square. It is an oxymoron. It just doesn't fit the definition. It's not arbitrary. It's a circle can't be a square. A circle can't be a triangle. A triangle can't be a square. A triangle can't be a rectangle. A triangle can be a triangle, and that is all a triangle can be. In terms of God being eternal, you don't have to believe in God, but for the sake of argument, the sake of the mythology of these religions, God is eternal, all-knowing, all-powerful. Okay? So, why is there suffering in the world? Why is there evil? Can you come up with one explanation as to why there could be? Maybe it builds character. Maybe some people who die young immediately go to heaven, a place of bliss and happiness. You don't know. But there's just some examples right there without being God. But imagine a being that literally knows everything, that has infinite knowledge. Who are we to say, with a finite amount of time on the planet, that we know better? I think that's just arrogance and hubris. We don't know anything. The older you get, the more you realize we're all stupid. We don't know anything about anything because we're all stupid. And history repeats, as Malazan consistently proves, we just can't do it right. We continually do it wrong, which is why Trek is always incorrect in the idea that we could be perfect and live in this utopia of a world, which is why DS9 is my favorite Star Trek. Getting off topic, but the point is that God is inherently good and therefore cannot do anything that goes opposed to his nature. It's not that he's making up laws and stuff as he wills it. No, these are inherently within him. He is good, so therefore he can only make good rules and stuff to set by. Inherently, by his very nature, he can't contradict himself. He can't be bad and good at the same time. So there are some things God can't do, which is be opposed to who they are, who God is. So, and I'll get off that topic now. I didn't mean to make it such a big long thing, but I did want to address it because there's a big thing there, and I was still impressed to actually see that level of philosophy put into this book. But again, I know no one's going to talk about it from my angle, so that's why I'm doing it here. Just because I know I'm going to be the only unique voice that discusses it in that veracity. So, veracity? Context? I don't know what the proper word for that is, but that is all. I'm going to move on. Sorry about that. Just thought I would address it. And up next we have Henerold Lordhust gives Animander a blade. This will be important for later. What's sort of right here? Being near another Mother Dark makes you dark? It's interesting. So those people truly are close to Mother Dark and believe in her religion, believe in what she will accomplish. Your skin literally turns like midnight. Black as black can be. But for some reason, because Stilches is totally like in it, except is he really? He's kind of like passive, it feels like, throughout this book. But he remains white. Animander wants his mother to bless his sword and basically give him an excuse to just act out and cause some sort of, violence in her name. She refuses, though. But he's looking for a reason. He's itching for one. This is not the Animander we knew in the Malazan Book of the Fallen, who is extremely wise and wary. This is a man ready for action. I wrote down murder in God's name. And murder is bad. I think we all agree on that. Murder is bad. It seemed to be harped on quite a bit that religious people will kill in God's name. Or murder. Sorry, see, there's a distinction. Murder is always wrong. Killing is just. That's the difference. If someone's about to pull a Glock and shoot your 2-year-old in the face and you stab them with a knife in the throat, that is not a murder. That is a killing. It is a just killing for a justified reason. Now, again, we can all debate and argue about what's just and what's not, and that's all fun and dandy, but at least in that context, I don't think anybody would say that that's murder. Because the moment you decide that someone else's life is less valuable than yours and you put the sword to someone else, you have forfeited your own right to life, is my thought process anyway. The moment you pull a gun on me, if I kill you, it's not murder because you have forfeited your right to life the moment you threaten mine. Right? And the same thing if I pulled a gun at you or a knife or whatever. The moment I threaten you with death, I have forfeited my right to life. That's how I see it. Obviously, in war, it's complicated, but then in war, it's not really the responsibility of the individual soldier, though they have their own morality that they should constantly be using to determine whether they should do something or not. But ultimately, they are a tool of someone else, though they should not use that as an excuse to just make themselves feel free of weight of responsibility on their own part. Morality is important when it comes to following or disobeying an order in any given circumstance with that. But I'm getting into weeds that I don't fully understand because I've never been in the military and I don't plan on it, so I'm not gonna, make some sort of specific claim on that matter. But it was an interesting section nonetheless. As I said, this book is very philosophical, very much like Told the Hound, so I appreciate the level of thinking that I must do. Now we get to my favorite part of the book. The part of the book. The part that you know, too, if you've read the book. Anestia's family death scene. I really don't even want to talk. I'm gonna read a certain section because it speaks for itself. So I don't know how much I'm gonna read. I didn't plan it out, but you're gonna bear with me for a second. Okay? So we have right here on my other phone. Anamander walked toward Andrist, his stride uneven, as if he was drunk, and halted near the hearthstone. Before he could speak, Andrist shook his head and said, I will name it. Anamander stiffened at his brother's cold pronouncement. Silchus spoke. Andrist, the weapon is not yours. The wound is mine, and I will name it. Anamander said, And if I name my future, Andrist, will you doubt me? Will you challenge me? Not now, whispered Silchus to Andrist. Not on this day, I beg you. Where were you? Keraspala asked again in a broken voice. Blind in the darkness, I warned you about it. You refused to heed me, and I warned you. Now see what she has made. Andrist moved alongside Anestia's body with tenderness that was aching to witness. He gathered her up in his arms and held her head against his breast. He did all this without once breaking his gaze upon Anamander. I will name it, he said. The sword is drawn, brother. As you can see, I am awakened to vengeance, and so shall this weapon be named. Vengeance. But Andrist shook his head, one hand stroking Anestia's hair. Anger blinds you, Anamander. You take hold of vengeance, and you believe it to be pure. Remember Henerold's words. The road is true. No, said Andrist, and tears glistened in streams down his cheeks. Vengeance deceives. When you see its road to be narrow, it is in truth wide. When you see it wide, the path is less than a thread. Name your sword vengeance, brother, and it will ever claim the wrong blood. In its blade's wake, I see the death of 1,000 innocents. He paused, looked round woodenly, as if not seeing what met his eyes. Who's to blame for this? The slayer who came to this house? Those who commanded them, the lust of battle itself, or was it a father's cruelty to his child 12 years ago, a stolen meal, a dead mother? An old wound, an imagined one. Vengeance, Anamander, is the slayer of righteousness. I need not reach to childhood's tragedy, brother. to know who has made himself my enemy on this day. Then you shall fail, Andrew said. Vengeance is not pure. It rewards with a bitter aftertaste. It is a thirst that cannot be assuaged. Leave me to name your sword, Anamander, I beg you, brother. Leave me to name it. Then do so, Anamander said. Grief. The word hung forlorn in the chamber amidst breaths drawn and then surrendered, and it stung like smoke. Anderist, take this name from me, Anamander. Please. Take it. It has no strength, no will. Grief upon iron it is rust, in fire it is ash, in life it is death. Brother, I will take nothing from that word. Anders looked up with bleak eyes. You will take my grief, Anamander, or never again shall I look upon you, or call you brother, or know your blood as mine own. Anamander sheathed the sword. Then you shall but hear the tales of the justice I will mete out in your name, and the vengeance I will exact, which I here swear upon the still body of your beloved, and upon her father's cold flesh. Silcher stepped into the chamber, and as Anamander marched past him, he reached out and spun his brother round. Do not do this. Take his grief, Anamander. Upon your blade, take it. In so dull every edge, Silchus, I think not. Will you leave him to bear it alone? I am dead in his eyes. Let him mourn us both. Kidspala laughed softly. I have him now. His portrait, I have him at last, I have him. His portrait, and I have him on the skin I have him. Wait and see. From the hearthstone Anders wept, and then words spilled from him, loose and filled with despair. Will no one share my grief? Will no one mourn with me? Silchus said, I will bring him back. But Anders shook his head. I am blind to him, Silchus. Choose now. I will bring him back. Then go. Silchus rushed from the chamber. Kedispala struggled free of grip, pushing with his feet. He rose, tottering fingers cutting at the air. Listen to them. Who sees here? Not them, only me, Kedispala, who has no eyes, is the only one who can see. Kedispala, called Andrus, I hold your sister in my arms. Join me here. You were alone, the man replied in a voice empty of all sympathy. She was never for you. You made for her this path with your pathetic words of love and adoration. And she walked it to her death. Look on me, O forgotten son of darkness, for I am your child, your malformed, twisted spawn in these holes. See your future if you dare. What else needs to be said? Anestia, her whole family, murdered, slaughtered. Andrus is in such grief. He has no measure of strength left to enact vengeance or justice or anything, even if he wants to, upon anyone else. He wants no more bloodshed. He wants no more violence. He simply wants to grieve. But grieving, of course, is, no matter how many people it affects, it is an individual sort of problem. You can find comfort in others going through the same thing, but ultimately the healing comes from yourself. There's no amount of just being with someone else who's dealt with something will help you. You must work through it yourself. But it's heartbreaking. All Anders wants is for someone to... There's double meanings here, of course. It is setting up things to come, but it is also just a brother asking his oldest to just sit there and be with him as he mourns, as he grieves. It's also a nature on Anamander who is grieving. This was like another family to him, it seems like. But his reaction is he needs justice. He can't sit still. He can't sit there and grieve with Anderist. He needs action now. Not tomorrow, not in some distant future, today. And so picks up vengeance. But again, the double meaning, he's going to go on a rampage. He's going to fight and fight, which goes against what his brother wishes in this moment. He's not thinking about himself, or he's not thinking about his brother, he's only thinking about himself. even if he says he's doing it for Andrist. So there's meanings here for what the future holds in terms of the story potential here, but it also just stands to reason the personalness, the this is it speaks to the grander narrative at play, but it is also this moment between brother to brother. Now, one brother rejects being there for his younger brother just so that he, in his own way, can go through the grieving process and fight. And Maiden names his sword Vengeance. Silchus seems quite indecisive. He seems to be the middle child, clearly, so he's just trying to hold the family together. But then the heartbreakingness too. Anders says, "Brother, please just stay with me." And I know you heard my voice. I kind of interpreted it a little bit differently the first time. He tries to be reassuring and he tells Andrist, "I will bring him back." And Andrist is like, "He's already gone, and he's dead to me. I just need you. You're here now. Please be with me. I'm holding my wife to be in my arms now. Just be here with me. Hold me. Give me a hug. Something. Be with me. Be present with me in this moment." And, in my mind, still just, you know, not as confidently because he doesn't know if he can bring Animender back, and he's questioning whether or not leaving right now is the right decision. At least that's how I interpret that. So the second time, I will bring him back, leaving his youngest brother all alone. Meanwhile, Kataspal is going insane over his sister's death, which is a whole other can of worms. But absolutely, the standout scene of the entire book, nothing else compares, is this scene. From the writing quality to to the double meanings and layers to the conversation, it is just a masterclass of writing. It is so powerful, so poignant, so wonderfully done. And I know I'm using these words and trying to make myself sound cool. I'm just saying it was done really well. I cannot give it more praise. Like, it is just so solid. So solid, like, I didn't want to just summarize. I had to read at least portions of it so you could feel it. All right, moving on. We move on to part 4, Forge of Darkness. Kroll, we remember him, is apparently an Azath, or a Xanthonai. We also get some origins to the Gothos, Lord of Hate, suicide note, which I don't think I ever addressed too much in the actual Book of the Fallen, but we get some stuff there with that. But more than Animander, we see this with several characters going through to kind of reiterate this kind of whole Shakespearean Greek tragedy of violence upon violence upon violence, no end in sight. Rind also wants violence or vengeance, um, and Farron just wants her brother. Also, the Shalek are wolves. I didn't realize that. But there's this really cool scene between the Rusk and the Darog clan, and this again very much Darog, I don't know, but it very much again seems to be touching on similar themes as to what other books have, from like Deadhouse Gates to some others, um, where the Jalak were the native people of the land, which right now we're in Kharkanas or Korald Ghilain, which is like a different realm, right? I get confused on that stuff. Pretty sure it's a different plane. It's not like normal mainland from Malazan, or continents, I should say. I don't know. Anyway, they say that they were here first, and they offer hospitality, they feed them, and all that stuff. It's just a very interesting conversation between these people. I really enjoyed it. But yeah, again, the topic comes up as civilization, animal life, as civilization comes, they start hunting, they start doing all this stuff, and they leave less wildlife for the natives, for the people that were there first. They what they would always do is they would kill the strongest or the weakest. It leaves the strongest animals to mate and make more, and but now there's like hardly any animals left because civilization keeps taking them. Rin's family, we learn, is dead, so now we head to war. Um, Draconis gives Mother Dark the gates of Korod Galain, which will be important for later. And then lastly, we end with Enamander meeting back up with Kaladin Brood, and Kaladin Brood saying, "Bro, you're stuck with me." So I'm sure we're going to get a lot more of Kaladin Brood in Book 2, Full of Light. Overall, I went over the biggest important things that I felt about this book. So Forge of Darkness is solid. I'm definitely going to do a ranking thing of all of the Malazan books as I get through them. This is definitely probably going to go up in those tier lists. It's definitely going above um, at least Gardens of the Moon and probably Bone Hunters for me. We'll see where it all lands by the end, but loving it. Loving it, loving it. Loving the more medieval tone of it, which makes sense because, of course, Malazan, whatever, was very. I seem to be saying it more the proper way now. Before I was like, no, I'm going to say Malazan forever, but now Malazan's kind of. I've grown to it. Um, I've been sucked in. But the Malazan Empire, Malazan, is definitely more Roman. This is more medieval, and the wording, the terminologies, everything definitely feels more of that classical medieval sense. But it works really well. This is the ancient past, so they would be talking different, and everything just works together to make this really philosophical um, novel that is also very emotional. Um, Also, just giving some more insights into a world that we really love. So, um, getting to see a young Animander is great. And if you've read everything, and then eventually, Walk in Shadows will be out, and so will God is Not Willing. But imagine like doing this in chronological order. You read Kharkanas, you read those chapters like in the prologues and stuff of Midnight Tides and Reaper's Gale that have more of this stuff, and then you jump into the Path to Ascendancy. You read Midnight Tides. You read Esselmont's Knight of Knives, and you work your way through the Malazan books again, and you just have this ultimate experience as you've read all three of the prequel books plus the Path to Ascendancy. You just have all this context now that when you go into, whenever you go into your third, fourth, fifth, thousandth, read um, of the Malazan Book of the Fallen, now you have all this context that's going to make those scenes, especially in Reaper's Gale and Toll the Hounds and a little bit in The Crippled God and Dust of Dreams, like so much more interesting because you'll have all this context. So I think that'll make a reread a lot of fun. Um, but overall, absolutely, I recommend it. I understand that some people get different things out of these books, but really, truly, truly, like it may not be the typical Malazan formula, but it still is so Erickson. And you will never read anything fiction wise quite this good often. You have things that are good, but do you have things that are written this well often? You don't get people like Steven Erickson that often. You must cherish it every time you get somebody of this caliber. Like, truly good stuff here. And I recommend it to anybody. I know like for new readers, this is definitely not the way to go, and I would not recommend this if you haven't read Malazan Book of the Fallen, because, I mean, you could. I even saw a review once that reviewed it without having read those books, and they still enjoyed it immensely, but I think part of the fun is already knowing some stuff and making correlations to that in hindsight. Um, but yeah, absolutely a banger, phenomenal, phenomenal read. I'm so excited to read Fall of Light, and I'll see you all when we discuss that. Until next time, I guess we'll see how vengeance is meted out next time. Meted out? Whatever. Till then.